have the pleasure today to have Steve Groff. He is also known as the coach for cover crops. He knows everything you need to know about it. And right here on Connected Partner, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Steve, thanks a lot for being here with with us. Again, it's such a pleasure to have you here to share all your knowledge about crops. We'll have a great push for no tillage farming in the US through this channel, and I will go straight to the questions about the one of the big mistakes the farmers have adopting cover crops. One of the mistakes that you are used to mention is that most of the times the seeds don't get deep enough. So, what's your recommendation when the farmer has this sort of problem?
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've learned over the decades of experience that I have. We all know that when you're planting no-till into cover crops, you have that cover crop biomass that makes it more difficult to get the seeds in the ground. So we have row cleaners that can clean away or move the biomass from the residue from the cover crops away. But sometimes, either the farmer doesn't have a row cleaner, or a lot of us have taken off our no-till coulters now. And what we have found is that if you plant a little deeper, like 1 centimeter deeper, or something like that, it'll cut the cover crop residue better. It'll cut it cleaner, and it'll be a better seed to soil contact. The other thing too is that the genetics of corn and soybeans have greatly improved for early season vigor. And so even if the soil might be a little cooler, a little deeper, planting your cash crops a little deeper can make a more even stand. And that's just something that we've noticed. Now, for your first planting in the spring, it might not be such a good idea to plant deeper, but as the season progresses, as the soil warms up, then you can plant a little deeper and you will have a more consistent stand of plants.
Here today, Steve Groff on Connected Farmer. If you are liking our content, please give us a like and subscribe or hit the bell button. Steve is the author of the book, The Future Proof Farm. And one of the other problems that he has identified, I should say, that farmers very frequently have no nitrogen in their field. So, Steve, how do you resolve this?
So that's in reference when you do not have legume cover crops in your field. So if you have like the cereal rye or triticale or any of the grassy type cover crops that utilize nitrogen, if you're going to plant corn into that cover crop, you need to assume that there's no nitrogen available because the cover crop has taken all the nitrogen up for it to grow. Now that nitrogen that's in the cover crop will come back as the cover crop decomposes, but it won't be till later on in the season. Weeks, maybe months, depending on how old it is, how mature it is. So one of the things we've seen problems where farmers don't have enough nitrogen right near the seed for corn. And then the corn is yellow and there's just no nitrogen there. It was a good thing that the cover crop took up the nitrogen so it doesn't leach, so it doesn't go back into the groundwater. But it's tied up in the plant residue. So having some starter fertilizer that has some nitrogen in it to put in the furrow is important, and then also have some nitrogen close to the seed. Like put it in with a coulter is very important when you're doing corn. Now, when you're planting soybeans, it doesn't matter because soybeans don't need nitrogen. They make their own nitrogen. So for corn, you want to have nitrogen in the furrow in a very tiny amount, a very small amount. You don't want to burn the seeds. You have to have the proper nitrogen in the furrow and then some to the side of it, because that is going to help to get the corn off to a good start. And then later on, some of that nitrogen that was in the cover crop will come back to the corn later on in the summer.
Steve, what about the termination timing?
So termination timing, there's a couple things that you need to understand. The biggest and most important, I should say, management is controlling moisture, controlling the water. If it is rainy and it's wet, leave the cover crop grow. Leave it soak up the moisture that's in the field. If it's dry and there's no rain expected for 1 week or 2 weeks, then you might want to come in and terminate the cover crop so it doesn't take any moisture out, any more moisture out of the soil profile in order for your cash crop to grow. So this is paying attention to the weather, and you just have to learn how to manage that. So it's all about the moisture. Now, some of us have, we kind of have, we like to have the cover crop more mature because we get more benefits out of it. It covers the ground better. It doesn't decompose as quickly. That's a challenge for new people just starting. But once you understand you have the good equipment, we like to leave it grow as long as possible. We will even plant into it green. We have a term called planting green. We'll plant into the cover crop and maybe we don't terminate it until after we plant sometimes. Now there's one thing that you really have to understand, another mistake that some people make. That is, if you terminate your cover crop and then it rains a lot, before you get your cash crop planted, the cover crop is going to keep the moisture from, because it's dead now, the moisture won't leave and you might not be able to plant your corn for 2 or 3 weeks. So only terminate as much as you can plant before the next rain. That's a key thing that you need to understand.
Steve, tell us a little bit more about your background. When did you start cover crops? Was a long time ago?
So I first started no-tillage in 1982. That's 38 years ago. And I used cover crops off and on, but it wasn't until 1995 that I began to do some research on cover cropping. And in 1999, we had a very dry year here, and corn yields were down 40%. So where I had used cover crops, and we had done some research on this, I had 28 bushel more yield where I had used cover crops the previous 4 years. So ever since that time, it's no turning back. I use cover crops every hectare, every time I can, and I'm very, it's a part of my system. I have a saying, treat your cover crops like your cash crops. So for me, my cover crop actually is part of my cash crops because it does so many things that affect my cash crops.
And why you traveled around the world, and why do you think that some places like Brazil and Argentina adopt more often no-tillage than the United States?
Well, I was in Argentina in the fall, or the November of 2019, and I think I was asking the same. When I arrived in Argentina and spent a week in the La Pampas region, seeing farms, doing field days and so forth, and hearing the farmers' stories, I understood better that I think in the mid 1990s is when no-till started really flourishing. I think one of the key factors is there was a lot of land, particularly in Argentina, there was a lot of land that had been used for cattle grazing. And so it had been essentially no-till for many decades. And then with the Roundup ready crops like Roundup ready soybeans, it was easy to plant the soybeans into those situations, and it was very easy to manage, very easy to do. And so I think that's one of the reasons why no-till spread rapidly. Now, what I found interesting, being just there less than a year ago, was that the use of cover crops was not near as much as the use of no-till. And I think the South American farmer is learning now that they really need to use cover crops. Now, it's not that they haven't been doing a good job, but I think there's a lot more opportunity to use cover crops, and that's what I see happening in the years ahead. Cover crops are going to increase in Argentina and Brazil.
I will provide a link for you to buy the Steve Groff's book, The Future Proof Farm. Steve, I would like to know where are you located in Pennsylvania, and how is your crop right now?
So I am in southeastern Pennsylvania. I'm 2.5 hours northeast of Washington, D.C., 3.5 hours southeast of New York City. So that gives you my location. We have had a little cooler than normal spring, maybe a little wetter than normal spring, but overall our crops are looking pretty good right now. Most of the farmers are pretty happy. We got them planted a little late, but not too late. But they're growing. We have nice warm weather now, so we're just getting into the summertime here, and things are looking pretty good in my area right now. We're grateful for that.
Steve, thanks again for being on Connected Farmer.
You're quite welcome. My pleasure. Glad to be here.